So now let's talk about the basic section of the editing tab in your develop window here in Lightroom Classic. So there are a bunch of different sections here to unpack, so let's walk through them one by one. So if we start at the very top, there's an auto, there's a black and white, and then there's HDR. So if you click auto, it will automatically edit for you. If it uses some probably heuristics or some AI to just determine what it thinks is a good edit for your photo. It will make all the changes for you and you don't have to work on it. But I'm pretty sure you're not here to do that because you're going through the course yourself. You want to actually learn how to make the specific changes. Another option here is you can turn your photo black and white. So actually let's reset the image from the auto setting. So we lost the crop. Let's quickly crop this again, like here. And let's go back to the develop settings here. And then we can go to the black and white. It will turn your image black and white. Basically, you lose the ability to modify your vibrance and your saturation. So anything related to color would have a lesser effect. It might be still useful to change some color patterns like this. You can see that the highlights will change if you change the color temperature or the tint, but it's a much lesser effect than if the photo is in black and white. So if you uncheck black and white, everything comes back. You can make whatever changes you want to the image now. So first of all, let's see here what we can do with the temperature and the tint. Maybe we can try to correct some of this, right? So it was really orangish and yellow, reddish. The image, you can see the snow looks unnaturally colored. I know some sunsets might look like this, but this particular one did not. It's just the artifact of the camera modifications I have. So in order to make this look more natural, let's turn things bluer. And we don't want to go too far. See if we go too far. Right now things look unnaturally blue and the sky gets messed up. So we want to bring that back until we think things are looking kind of nice on the blue stain. And then let's try to bring back the purple a little bit. But actually first let's see what happens if we bring out too much more purple tint. This is not helping our pick image at all. We want to bring this back until we feel like it's got a natural color to it. And so we may be able to actually go change the color temperature again a little bit after we have changed the tint. So yeah, we're able to make the image sky look more blue while still maintaining a natural look to the image. So yeah, you can play with this. So basically, right, one thing that you should always keep in mind when you're editing a photo, the goal is to make something that's visually pleasing. So you can use that frequently as a guide for as you edit and walk through the different steps. I highly encourage you to try the extremes in editing, whatever that is, whatever the characteristics of the photo that you're changing, the exposure, the saturation, temperature, tint, any of these things. It can be, you can learn useful information about your photo just by going to the extremes. So when we come down here, the next feature is the exposure, right? So this one, some of these may not be quite as explanatory as the very clear temperature and tint, which have clear colors, and you can understand that they're adjusting towards the opposing colors. But with exposure, right, this is just how bright the image is. So basically, you can make this scene really dark like this. Obviously, that has some advantages because you can see now that it brought out some color in the clouds. Or you could say, oh, I think the snow is not bright enough and I need to make it brighter. So you have a few different options for changing the brightness. And so basically all of these tone settings here are all basically related to the brightness of your image. So this highlights here will just modify all the highlights of your image. So in our image here, right, we want the sky to be be darker, so we probably bring the highlights down, right? So because if we bring out the highlights, right, we're blowing out the image, which we don't want to do. That's what that red like highlight there is. It's just telling me that the part of the image would be completely blown out if this brightness setting was used. So we can bring it down, and as we bring it down, right, the sky looks better. So let's see, what do we want to do with the shadows? So if we bring down the shadows, right, like we don't want to bring them down too far, obviously. You see there's clear problems with some blue points popping up in there. But if we want to bring out the shadows a little bit, right, the whole foreground actually would be considered a shadow in this image. So just bringing up the shadows a little bit will brighten the foreground, which I think in this image might have a nice effect, right? Even bringing up the shadows 100% like might actually work really well in some images. So likely it's working well in this image because I intentionally captured this image slightly underexposed so that the dynamic range between the brightness of the sky and the darkness of the foreground would be visible, right? Because we don't want the sky to be blown out. But if we underexpose it a little bit, the foreground will still be bright enough, as you can see it is here. So I think 100% is probably too much. So we want a little bit more contrast there. So we will bring that back. So that brings us to the contrast. So basically, a quick definition of contrast would be that you are making if you extend the contrast, right, you're making the brights brighter and the darks darker. And if you reduce your contrast, you're bringing the brights and the darks closer to each other. So if you see here, right, like I bring the contrast all the way down, the image becomes really soft because there's like the brights and the darks are very close to each other. You can barely make out even some of the clouds in the sky. But if I bring the contrast all the way out, right, then I kind of like make it the darks too dark and the brights too bright. And so, but like you can see a lot more detail, especially in the clouds with more contrast. So it seems like if in this image mostly you would probably want to add a little bit more contrast. So let's add a little contrast. Obviously, a lot of these things are going to be based on how you feel about editing images, right? Like there are different options and different ways to get to the same output. So basically, right, like you can see here, right, when we reduce the highlights and the shadows, we're doing an inverse contrast, right, where we are reducing the highlights and increasing the shadows. So we're actually bringing the contrast closer together. So basically, actually, I'm curious like what we can do here if we make these basically the same preset. We should be able to have a similar effect, or somewhat of a similar effect, by bringing the contrast down. See, it has a little bit different effect, right? So you have to, in order to understand what this is actually doing, you have to probably understand the details of the algorithms behind it and how it determines what's a highlight and what's a shadow, and how it performs some sort of gradient calculation in order to brighten or darken different parts of the photo. But you can see here that we have somewhat of a similar effect by reducing the contrast as we do to, because it brings the lighting of the image closer together, the same as reducing the highlights here does and increasing the shadows does. But it does give a more pleasing appeal if you extend the highlights in one direction and bring the shadows up here. I think this is like a better looking result. So basically, one other thing that you should keep in mind is my photos are probably having a very high dynamic range because I use the Sony A7R4, which has a very high level of dynamic range, which basically means that the amount of light capture between the brightest point and the darkest point is very, very far between them. So with your camera, you may get differing results from this. So you might have to be more careful about how you capture the brights and the darks when you're capturing a photo, and then also when you're editing, you may not be able to go to as extreme lengths of changing the brightness of the whole image or just the highlights and the shadows. Another option you have here is just to bring out the whites, right? So again, bringing out the whites in this image is going to blow out the sky at the current edit. Bringing out down the whites, you can clearly see like the whole image, all the white areas become darker. So the snow, the bright parts of the sky, stuff like that. So we can reduce the whites a little bit here if we want. So with the blacks, this will really reduce the contrast in the image, right? If we increase the blacks all the way, if we darken them all the way, obviously, it's going to be completely blacked out, which is maybe not the best thing. So maybe we go light on the blacks, and maybe we brighten them a little bit so the image in the foreground is not quite as dark. So let's do something like that. So then we come to presence. So these are some different editing processes. So there's, first of all, there's texture. So basically, let's zoom into the plants here so we can kind of get an idea what these things are doing to the details of the image, right? The lighting, the tone that we just covered, right? Mostly that's just an overall view of the entire image. So probably you want to look at that one at the full level of the image. But some of these other edits really can change the details. So you might want to zoom in on specific parts of your image and see how those parts of the images are changing, and then maybe zoom out to see what effect it had on the whole. So basically with texture here, right? So if we increase the texture, it adds more detail. And so it's a specific type of contrast, I would say, right? So if you add texture 100%, you can see a lot more detailed in these plant twigs or whatever you want to call them. And then if we reduce it, right, everything becomes blurry, right? And so basically you're losing the contrast, I would say, of some of the darks and the lights, and then it just smooths out the whole image in a very unpleasing way, in my opinion. So we maybe can add a little bit of texture. So keep in mind that when you're adding texture, you can see that it's adding the grain in the snow here, so things don't look as smooth as they did before. So that if you're looking at this image zoomed all the way in, maybe the texture isn't the best thing to add to the image, right? So maybe go light on some of these settings, and don't be too extreme with them is the main goal. So we can go to the texture for clarity. We can again, this is a slightly different contrast, and you really just have to play with these to learn exactly how they change your image. So you can see here, right, it's again changing the contrast significantly, so it really darkens different areas of your photo. Actually, in this photo, I think I want to reduce the contrast here, right? So this is going to be some of these things will be very photo dependent. Other ones will be based on your personal preference and whatever stylistic choices you're making. And then another option you have is dehaze. So dehaze is probably most likely to make changes into the sky. Let's see here, and it seems to be making the whole image darker. So let's not do that. So let's see. Let's zoom out on the image and see what dehaze is doing. So basically, if you remove the dehaze, you end up with haze, and so basically you really can't see a whole lot of detail in your image, right? Like this is pretty crazy, actually. It's like it almost looks like overexposed film or something. But yeah, so let's not do that, and let's keep it. So if we go and remove the dehaze here, so let's try to go for a softer edit on this. So basically, you have the this dehaze like this. It makes the image look pretty soft, but I think actually this looks pretty nice. So we have some color in this image, right? So we can see that the sky has some orange and some yellows and stuff. But we can do better, actually, if we're interested in increasing the amount of colors that you see. There are two main settings for doing that. There's the vibrance and the saturation. So basically, by increasing the saturation, you increase the amount of color. Basically, you can think of it that way. So it stretches the color so that you see more of it. So if you go to the full extreme, 100% increase in the saturation, you can see that we have some reddish colors in the sky, some orange, some yellow. The sky becomes more blue, and really like the whole image becomes more blue because the foreground has also a slightly blue tint, which may not be quite as noticeable before you bump your saturation way up. So obviously, we're probably not going for that extreme look. I mean, it actually doesn't look too bad, but like, let's dial things back a little bit. And so we'll keep it at something like this. And then if you another way is to increase the vibrance of the image. So this gives the colors more body, I guess you can say. So instead of just brightening them, and it gives them a fuller body to it. So one other thing to note here is when you're playing with the saturation is one way to make your photo black and white. Just remove saturation all the way down, and it gives you another interesting look at your photo, and you can see the details that are showing up only in black and white, which is kind of cool, especially in a snow image like this. Obviously, the sky would need a little bit different edit for like black and white. But yeah, that's how you use these different tools here. So yeah, if you're going for like an older style film look, you could like literally just bring down the vibrance of your image. You would have a really closer to black and white but still color image that has a pretty cool look and feel to it. But yeah, there's many different ways that you can edit the image using just the basic tools here.